Thank you, Mr. President. I ask the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
And I ask for unanimous consent to speak for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wanted to come to the floor today and make just a few comments about the crisis that is unfolding before us. Right now, some colleagues here in the Senate and others over on the House side are holding the entire American economy hostage to make their favored point on policy. Now, I must say that this blackmail against ordinary working-class Americans, threatening to steal whatever momentum our economy has rather than build greater momentum and greater jobs, is deeply misguided. And that's really as polite a way as I can possibly put it. Because when you think about what families have been through, working families have been through over the last few years, the deregulation of Wall Street, leading to predatory mortgages that hurt millions of families, and then securities that those were based on proceeded to derail our entire economy, hurting millions more. Families lost their savings. They lost their jobs. They lost the equity in their house. But now all that our working families are asking for is a little bit of common sense. Don't do further damage to the economy that is struggling to recover. And yet certain colleagues here in the Senate and over in the House seem to feel that the little people don't matter. The working people don't matter. The stability of the foundation for families, a living wage job, doesn't matter because they can play whatever political games they want, and the only people hurt are ones that they just don't see in their life. Maybe they live in a gated community. Maybe they live in a bubble. But I see those people. I see them every day. They are the salt of the earth. They are the shop, the workshop that takes America forward. They are the small businesses across this nation. And all they're asking for is a little reasonableness and common sense. Now, some of my colleagues have said this crisis comes because the majority party in the Senate has refused to negotiate. Nothing could be further from the truth. Negotiation on the budget process starts with each side passing a budget resolution and holding a conference committee. But it is members of the minority of this chamber that have come to this floor at least 18 times to block the start of a conference committee in order to work out the budget. Now, I can't imagine in my wildest dreams why they are terrified of there being a conversation between leadership in the House and leadership in the Senate meeting with a television camera to work out the details of budget compromise. But they seem terrified, petrified, scared to death of there being a conversation between the House and the Senate that would lead to a compromise. So indeed there has been obstruction on compromise, and we know exactly where it is. It's the same individuals who are trying to drive the economy over the cliff right now. So, moreover, members of this party said, let's go further. The Senate has a number. The House has a number. The Budget Conference Committee is being blocked. Let's simply accept the House number. Not split it down the middle. Not insist on our number. Let's take the House number. Well, that's going far beyond the middle path, if you will. That's a major compromise. So if you're looking for a compromise is happening, it's happening with the leadership of the Senate, putting forward a compromise that takes the House number for the budget. It just appears that certain individuals in this body just don't want to take yes for an answer. I'm going to conclude my remarks. I see my colleague, esteemed senator from Illinois, has arrived. I want to just close with this notion. This is not the first crisis that has been artificially manufactured that has damaged the American economy. Let us remember that similarly, we faced this in April 2011 with a continuing resolution. We faced a manufactured crisis with the debt ceiling in July of 2011. We faced the December 2012 fiscal cliff that did substantial damage. March of this year, continuing resolution, then bringing us up till right now. And this is not all. The same individuals who are threatening at this moment to drive our economy over a cliff are saying, and we'll do it again in a couple of weeks over another debt ceiling issue. And when this continuing resolution expires in a few weeks from now, if we get one done, we'll do it again a few weeks from now. 3 crises in the period of just a few weeks. If you want to destroy the economy for working Americans, this is how it's done, and it's unacceptable. And we need a bipartisan, common-sense caucus to come together and simply say no to those who are trying to create this terrible blackmail using American working families in the process. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator from Massachusetts.
I ask unanimous consent to speak for 5 minutes in morning hour.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are just hours away from a government shutdown. I think Tea Party Republicans saw Breaking Bad's dramatic depiction of reckless behavior last night and thought they could put on an even better finale. They could create even more drama. They could cook up even more toxic ideas. They could break this government in every bad way possible. These Tea Party antics are the stuff of fairy tales. The way the GOP is writing this story at the stroke of midnight as we turn the calendar to October, our government and potentially our economic recovery turn into a pumpkin. But it's the Tea Party GOP who are in fantasy land, thinking we will actually allow them to cut off Obamacare, shut down the government, and melt down our economy. Democrats are not going to allow them to do this. What do the American people want? Americans want our military to get paid on time. Americans want our seniors to get the benefits they've earned and depend on. Americans want to be able to respond to floods in Colorado or wildfires in the West. The American people don't want the government to shut down. Americans want a business plan that completes this recovery, creates jobs, and gets our economy back on track. They want us to work together to accomplish this goal. What are the effects of the Tea Party Republican tactics? Well, by forcing Congress to govern by going from crisis to crisis, Tea Party Republicans hope to chip away at the bedrock programs that run our country and help our country. First, the Tea Party did this with sequestration, which is really a fancy word for cuts, mindless cuts in programs that help ordinary families in our country. Now they're going after the Obamacare law. What's next are their enduring targets: Social Security, Medicare, the safety net programs that millions of Americans depend on. These are the same Republicans who want to privatize Social Security. They want to turn Medicare into a voucher program. Now they want to reverse the progress achieved by the legendary Ted Kennedy, who made it clear that in the United States of America, health care is a right and not a privilege. The Tea Party Republicans are playing high-wire politics with our economy so they can take away the social safety net for millions of American families. This bill is just a preview of coming attractions. 2 weeks from now, we'll be careening to the next crisis, this time over whether America will pay its debts. If we do not raise the debt ceiling, we won't be able to pay our bills starting on October 17th. And what is the harm of defaulting on our debts? Well, our nation's stock and bond markets could go into a free fall. That will damage the full faith and credit of our country, the bedrock of the entire American economy. And what does that mean? The full faith and credit of the United States is in question. If you took out a mortgage, had a car loan, bought some furniture, and when the bill came due, you said, I'm just not going to pay these bills, what do you think would happen? Your credit score would plummet. It would throw your financial life into chaos for years. No one would lend you money. or at a minimum, you would be hit with sky-high interest payments because of the risk. You wouldn't pay the next time either. Americans ran up these bills. We promised these payments. We should pay what we promised. And then we need to stop lurching from one crisis to another, scrambling to stitch together last-minute deals that only last until the very next crisis. It's time to end these games. It's time to end the uncertainty. It's time to do what we were sent here to do, to get to work creating jobs for American families so that they can have a mortgage, so that they can put their kids through school. That is what we should be talking about here, the prosperity of all Americans. This shutdown today is a preview of a debate over a meltdown of the American economy if, in fact, we go to a debt ceiling and we haven't found a way of working together out here on the Senate floor, Democrats and Republicans together, with Democrats and Republicans from the House of Representatives. Otherwise, those who are in most jeopardy are those who are watching us with their mouths open, agape, wondering how their system of government can operate this way. So I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, in less than 9 hours, unless there's an intervening effort that's successful, the government will shut down. And I know people across America are scratching their heads and saying, why? How did it ever reach this point? I went through O'Hare this morning. I've done that a lot in my life on my way back out to work. And it was interesting, the reaction of people just walking up to me, people I didn't know, saying, hang in there, good luck, we hope you can do it. And I realize that people across America are listening to this and they're watching this and they're trying to figure out, well, who's right or who's wrong or what difference does it make? Just a little while ago, about an hour ago, I was presiding as we took the vote on the latest House amendments. And in the middle of the vote, my staffer came up and handed me an email. And the email said that there was a House email that was circulating, and here's what it said. After the Senate tables the House amendments to the CR later this afternoon and the papers come back to the House, we will send it back to the Senate with another amendment delaying the individual mandate in Obamacare for a year and affect the members' health subsidy as well. Unfortunately, that message kind of betrays what's going on here. We kind of made it clear on the Senate side that we are sending a clean CR, no political strings attached to it, to just extend the government services and allow them to continue for 6 weeks, at least 6 weeks, while we try to work things out on a bipartisan basis. What we keep getting back from the House of Representatives are all sorts of political strings, medical device tax, Obamacare, conscience clause when it comes to family planning. All of these things are being thrown back to us as conditions for us if we're going to fund our government. If we wanted to, over on the Democratic side, we have the votes to put our own conditions on this. I can think of a couple. That the House takes up the bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform bill that we passed months ago here, and they've never even addressed in the House. That would be a good one, wouldn't it? At least from my point of view. How about the bipartisan farm bill that we passed twice in the United States Senate? They failed to pass in the House of Representatives for years. Why wouldn't we make that one of the conditions? And I can think of a few more. But we didn't do it. We sent them a clean CR, a clean spending bill, and said to them, let's just extend the functions of government. You know, John Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage, talks about men and women who served our nation and showed extraordinary courage. And some of us like to think at least once or twice in our public careers we get close to that standard. There's no political courage in what the House Republicans are doing. You see, they aren't standing up at any political risk themselves. They are threatening to shut down the government to affect the jobs of hundreds of thousands of innocent federal employees. People who get up and go to work every single day for this country because they love their jobs and they love this country. And they do a great job every day. They are viewed with disdain by so many critics of government. But were it not for those men and women and the contribution they make, we would not be the great nation we are at this moment in time. At midnight tonight, in less than 9 hours, our government shut down. Many, hundreds of thousands of them, be told, don't come to work. and we'll be lesser for it. Not just in the fact that we can't produce the services which our government needs to produce to help our people, and not just in the fact that innocent federal employees are going to lose their paychecks. They won't get paid, many of them, for the time that we're losing. But equally important, what it says about us, what it says about America. You know, we stand up and we say we're different, and we're proud of being different. Oldest democracy on the face of the earth. Yeah, we are, in many ways, different than some other nations, and we're proud of that difference. Sadly, at midnight tonight, the difference is not going to be something we can be proud of. It is the failure of political leaders in Congress to fund the government of the United States of America. The failure of political leaders in Congress to fund our government. I just want to say what this comes down to is very basic. There is a reason why we have elections. There is a reason why ultimately the decision on this issue and all the others will be given to the American people. What I ask them to do is to watch carefully what's happened in Washington and whether they want to continue it. Senator Merkley of Oregon came to the floor and talked about the beginning of this Tea Party effort, the first threat to shut down the government. You know, this is not altogether new, but it is unusual that we face this. Now it's becoming more frequent, more regular, business as usual, that we're going to shut down the government. That is the Tea Party approach to things. That's how they get their attention. 21 hours speaking on the floor, threatening to shut down the government. I don't think that's the answer to America's future. I think it's a problem. If you listen to Senator Merkley from Oregon, he talked about the fact that we passed a budget resolution in the Senate. I thought it was a good effort to try to figure out what our spending will be in the next fiscal year. We came up with a number. The House came up with a different number. The founding fathers in the Constitution anticipated that and created an opportunity for the House and Senate to sit down and work out their differences, called a conference committee. Senator Murray of Washington chairs our budget committee. She brought this to the floor and asked for unanimous consent to take this budget resolution to a conference committee so we could agree. She brought that request to the floor 6 months ago. The Tea Party Republicans stood up, some of the same Republicans we're seeing now, and objected to this meeting. No way, they said. We won't allow you to have this meeting between the Democrats and Republicans. Senator Murray and her backers on the committee and off renewed that request over and over and over again at every time the Tea Party Republicans objected. They did not want us to do the orderly constitutional thing of sitting down to work out our differences. They wanted a confrontation, and now they have it. We were unable to reach a budget number, unable to pass appropriation bills because of their objection, and now we face a government shutdown. If this is what you want as the ordinary course of business in Washington, if this is what you want for America, for our federal government and the good people who work for it, then keep on voting for Tea Party folks. This is their attitude. This is their idea. This is their idea of the new normal. Well, it shouldn't be the new normal. America is better than this. You know what's encouraging, Mr. President? There are a handful of Republicans who are finally standing up and saying, I've had enough of it. Senator John McCain, he and I disagree on so many things and agree on a few things, and we're different politically, but I really admire him, not just for his service in the Senate, but what he's given to this country. He's come to the floor. He gave in 10 minutes in a speech after that Texas senator finished his 21-hour speech. In 10 minutes, John McCain made more sense than in the 21 hours that preceded it. He said, I don't like Obamacare. I voted against it. I want to change it. But get real. It's the law. It was found constitutional by the court. And then the president, who authored it, was reelected by 5 million votes in America. That is how a democracy works. And those who won't accept Obamacare and want to try to stop it will not accept the verdict of this democracy, that we need to go forward, improve it, but go forward with this. That was Senator McCain's speech to us. And it was a good speech. I look back, and upstairs Senator Schumer talked about what we could have done in the past. What if we had said, you know, unless you repeal all the Bush tax cuts, we're not going to let you fund the government. We didn't do that. We shouldn't do that. It's not responsible. Mr. President, I hope that this doesn't come to pass. I hope at midnight we don't shut down this government. There'll be a lot of unhappy people in the federal service, and they don't deserve it. These are innocent people who just want to do a good job for this nation. There'll be a lot of people hurt on the outside because they can't have access to government services. And there'll be things that we will miss doing that'll have an impact, and we may never know it. What impact will it have if at the National Institutes of Health they suspend medical research until this is over? Just put it off a couple days, maybe a couple weeks if it gets really awful. And then what happens? A delay in finding a cure, a drug, a medical device. All these things make a difference in the lives of a lot of innocent people. So it's not an act of courage to play politics with the lives of other people and with the future of this America and with the future of our economy. Yes, this is why we have elections, so that the American people can say enough. We are not going to put up with this anymore. We need to have responsible Republicans and Democrats working together to solve our problems. I think that's why we were sent here, not to lurch from one confrontation to the next. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from Connecticut.
I ask to speak as if in morning business for 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, after 5 years of being a parent, I've gotten used to temper tantrums. It's just an unavoidable part of having kids. They demand something, they want a second dessert, they want another 10 minutes before bedtime, and if they don't get it, they storm out of the room. That aspect of early human nature, the inability to deal with defeat and the unwillingness to compromise, luckily that goes away over time as we get older and wiser and more thoughtful. Everywhere except for Washington, D.C. By now, everybody gets what's going on. As Senator Durbin said, we are only a handful of hours away from a government shutdown, another manufactured, made-up, totally avoidable crisis. This one is just because we can't pass a 6-month continuing resolution. We're having a problem just keeping the government open on the exact same rules that it has been open, because a small set of Tea Party senators and congressmen are basically throwing a temper tantrum because they haven't gotten their way. It's not news to anybody that Republicans opposed the health care law. They opposed it back when it was passed by both chambers, signed by the President. They opposed it when the Supreme Court upheld the legislation. Their presidential candidate opposed it when he got roundly defeated in the 2012 election. My opponent and the opponent of every single senator who stood for election that voted for the law opposed it as well. And every single time, they lost. Over and over again, Republicans have made it clear that they don't like the Affordable Care Act. They voted 40 times to repeal it or defund it or postpone it in the House of Representatives. This is despite the fact that today the Affordable Care Act is saving millions of seniors millions of dollars because they don't have to pay for drugs in the donut hole. This is despite the fact that starting in January it's going to save millions of people across the country from having to go into bankruptcy because they can't afford health care. But the Republicans are refusing to vote for a budget that would keep the government operating unless this health care bill is stopped. Now, for too many of those urging a government shutdown, government has just become an abstraction. They've sold themselves on the idea that government is so twisted and malignant that shutting it down just wouldn't really do anything. After all, if your goal is to starve the beast, then, what better than just putting the beast into a coma for a couple days or a week? But that's not how this works. Government does real things for real people. It pays paychecks for 9,000 people in Connecticut. It pays Social Security benefits and processes claims for disabled veterans. It inspects our food. At the NIH, it comes up with cures for new diseases. The markets watch whether the government operates because they actually know that the private sector works better when the public sector is working better. And so that's why today the market once again has been falling through the floor, as it will if we move forward with this madness. And just like we don't give in to our kids when they threaten us if we don't give them what they want, America cannot reward this my way or the highway approach from the Tea Party. I have strong beliefs just like my Tea Party Republican friends do. But I also get that I'm part of a majoritarian deliberative body. Senator McCaskill and Senator Durbin made the point, as did you, Mr. President. We all would love to attach things to this continuing resolution. There are 20 grieving families in Newtown, Connecticut who do not understand why 90% of the American public wants background checks on weapons, and we can't pass that in the United States Senate. I bet you some of them would think that it might make sense for us to condition our support of the continuing resolution until we get background checks on gun purchases. 90% of the American public supports that, but we're not doing that. That's not how you govern. Hold the entire federal government hostage to get what you want. Ultimately, though, Mr. President, this just can't be how this place works. This is a 6-week continuing resolution. As you said, it's going to just happen 6 weeks from now and 6 weeks after that. I heard that a long time ago, this place used to actually be involved in the business of running the country. It just doesn't feel like that anymore. As I sat there on the dais, Mr. President, a week ago now, watching the middle act of Senator Cruz's long speech, didn't feel a lot different than it has for most days that I've watched the Tea Party over the last several years. Felt like I was a theater goer. What's happening this week really isn't exceptional. It's just the latest and worst example of a long trend line away of legislating and toward play acting. With rare exceptions, usually prompted only by deadlines and cliffs and fake crises, we don't do anything here any longer. We just dig trenches and we make arguments. We pass fake bills. We play act. Occasionally, when the stacks of all the things around us are about to come teetering down on us, we stop and we push them back up again, instead of thinking for a couple seconds that if we just stopped, sat back, and actually restacked those sets of things so that they didn't come crashing down on us, we'd probably be better off. We just play parts. There's nobody better at playing their part than the Tea Party Republicans. Their character is recalcitrant, uncompromising, destructive, and we've seen all of that on display this week. And if we get beyond this crisis, we'll just see it once again. But there's no curtain call here in Congress, after which we can pull back our masks and share a good laugh. We're still going to be all left on stage, tasked with picking up the pieces. I think I'm past believing that these folks are going to just start playing a different role. It's time for the American public to start asking some questions about people before they send them here. Are you willing to compromise? Are you interested in actually running the government? Are you going to score your term based on whether you deliver for the American people rather than how many Twitter followers you have or how many times you showed up on the TV news that week? If this government shuts down tonight, it is just because of a temper tantrum, or put it another way, a really bad play whose third act has gone on way too long. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the call to be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today is not a time for me to stand and speak about the loss of a staff member that I feel so strongly about. But I've worked personally on this speech. I would ask unanimous consent that it appear in the record as I've given live.
Without objection.
The man I'm talking about is Darrell Thompson, who most people know. He's been with me for 10 years. Obama's campaign manager when he ran for the Senate. Just a wonderful man. And I'm sorry, but it was not appropriate for me to take Senate time now. I do this. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to H.R. 3210. It was received from the House in the last 24 hours. I ask consent that the bill be read 3 times past. Motion reconsider be made and laid on the table.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Republican Leader.
I have a number of colleagues here on the floor.
I hadn't given up the floor yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Majority Leader.
The order now before this body is that we have morning business until 4 o'clock today. And I would ask consent that we extend that until 6 p.m. under the provisions of previous order and that have been in effect, and that I be recognized after that time.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Republican Leader.
Mr. President, the consent the Majority Leader just asked was one a number of my colleagues were about to ask. It dealt with the military pay issue, and a number of them are here on the floor. And I'd like to ask consent that we be able to engage in a colloquy on the issue of protecting military pay.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I know that, as the Republican leaders noted, there's a number of members here on the floor who've come en masse from a meeting that we just held following the tabling of the latest House proposal that would keep the federal government operating and make sure that all of our uniformed military would continue to get paid, together with the other operations of the federal government. And it was clear that it was under the pressure of the knowledge that we were coming to the floor to ask for unanimous consent, and the knowledge of how, frankly, untenable it would be to object to that the Majority Leader has quite skillfully come to the floor to try to preempt this issue. But the truth is, none of us should be under any illusion that the Majority Leader has done anything other than make it more likely that we will have a shutdown of the federal government tonight. The House has sent over several reasonable proposals that would keep the federal government operating, which would also make sure our troops would be paid, but not just uniformed military, but other government personnel performing important jobs. And the Majority Leader, rather than call us in yesterday after the House acted, we know that perhaps the Majority Leader and other members enjoyed watching a little bit of professional football yesterday, but waited until this afternoon to cut the legs out from under the House proposal and make it much more likely that the government will shut down. The House worked late into the night last night, or this weekend, to draft a compromise proposal that would fund the government and avert a shutdown. The House members sent the proposal over to the Senate, and the Majority Leader did nothing until today. No emergency session, no bipartisan negotiations. There's a report in the Politico that President Obama was suggested calling the leadership on both of the houses, Republicans and Democrats alike, to the White House to have a meeting to say, what can we do to solve this impasse? And if the story is to be believed, it was Harry Reid who shut that down, just as he is going to be responsible for shutting down the federal government by the actions that he took earlier today. So the question is, who is really being unreasonable here? Who's really being stubborn? Who's really seeking to gain partisan advantage over the best interests of the country? Of course, we know the President has been eager to negotiate with the President of Iran about a very serious issue, Iran's nuclear aspirations, but he won't talk to the Speaker of the House of Representatives or the Republican leader of the U.S. Senate. He won't talk to them, but he will negotiate with the Iranian president. He seems absolutely allergic to doing his job. He can give a heck of a speech. He's a skillful orator, but when it comes to actually doing his job, he's missing in action. He won't negotiate over a government shutdown, and he won't negotiate over raising the debt limit. In the past, President Obama has urged Republicans to offer just a little bit of compromise when he likes to be the voice of reason. But now he himself refuses to engage in any sort of negotiation and refuses to offer any kind of compromise whatsoever. Now, is it possible that the President of the United States thinks that his own health care law is perfect in every way? Well, 79 members of this body voted against the medical device tax, and the House could pass that piece of legislation and send it over here and attach it to the continuing resolution. And the President himself has repeatedly delayed different provisions of the health care bill, including the employer mandate. What we'd like to do is get the same break for the rest of the American people as he gave businesses. Well, the bill that was passed by the House of Representatives would have delayed Obamacare for 1 year, and it would also have repealed the medical device tax, which is already killing jobs and hampering medical innovation. Well, now we're being told that those sort of very same proposals, which mirror the same proposals the President has unilaterally taken or which are supported by a bipartisan majority of the United States Senate, they're called an act of extremism. What's more extreme? Trying to negotiate through an impasse and to resolve this issue of the federal government functioning, or to refuse to negotiate, to stonewall against any reasonable proposal by the House, and to make it more likely that the federal government will shut down tonight. I ask, who is being more unreasonable and more stubborn? We know the clock is ticking, Mr. President. The American people are absolutely disgusted. I share their frustration, and I can only hope that cooler heads will prevail among our friends on the other side of the aisle.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I appreciate being a part of the colloquy with the senator from Texas, and I was listening to his comments. I remember being asked by Senator McConnell and the House Speaker, John Boehner, to speak on behalf of Republicans at the President's Health Care Summit 3 years ago about the new health care law. And I was the first speaker there, and since that time have done my best to try to avoid its passage and then to replace and repeal it. But I'm not in the shut down the government crowd. I'm in the let's take over the government crowd and elect a number of more Republicans and even a Republican president who agree with us and who want a different kind of health care law, one that introduces choice and competition and that actually reduces health care costs for most Americans. What bothers me so much about this impasse today is the effect it might have on our military men and women around the world. I'm trying to imagine what it must be like for someone fighting in Afghanistan whose check might be late, whose spouse is at Fort Campbell, and whose mortgage is due today, or tomorrow, or the next day. Or what if the Department of Defense school closes there, and that spouse has a job and no child care? These are very practical problems that we need to be thinking about. We need not to be thinking about shutting down the government. We need to be thinking about a way to fund the government and change the health care law at the same time. Now, the House of Representatives has tried once and now tried again to make a reasonable offer. They're reasonable suggestion, and, you know, these discussions are all about compromise, about taking suggestions that come from one body to the other body and taking what you can. So they've come back and said, well, the United States Senate had 79 senators, including many Democrats, who voted to repeal the medical device tax. Here's an opportunity to do that. And they said, let's delay the individual mandate for a year. I'm surprised the President himself hasn't done that. The President himself has delayed 7 provisions, major provisions in the health care law, including the employer mandate. The regulations aren't ready. The program's supposed to start tomorrow. It would seem to me that it would actually be to the President's benefit as well as the country's benefit to say, instead of just delaying parts and exempting these people, let's get it right. Let's delay it for a year. That's what the House of Representatives, the Republican House, has said to the Senate. They've said, let's repeal the medical device tax, a particularly onerous 2.3% tax on top of revenues that increases the cost of medical devices for millions of Americans. We all agree we ought to get rid of it. 79 of us do anyway, including about as many Democrats as Republicans. And then the President himself has acknowledged that this law isn't ready. The chairman of the Democratic committee that wrote it says it's coming a train wreck. So it seems to me this is a reasonable suggestion from the House of Representatives to say, let's work on getting rid of Obamacare. That's what we would like to do, or changing it. That's what they would like to do to make it work. But let's fund the government. Let's not run the risk that one single soldier fighting in Afghanistan has a paycheck that's one day late because his spouse is home in Fort Campbell and the mortgage can't be paid. Or the Department of Defense school is closed and there's no child care for the spouse who has a job while her husband or his wife is fighting overseas. Now, that's something we should not allow happen, whether we're Republicans or Democrats. And it may be that the majority leader agrees with that, and he's brought that up, and we've brought that up, but we should do more than bring up political points. People expect us to act like adults, work together, come to a result. So we can change the health care law, and we can keep the government going. I've said for 3 years that instead of the historic mistake we passed, expanding a health care delivery system that already costs too much, we should go step by step to have a health care law that actually reduces health care costs, make Medicare solvent, instead of taking $500 billion out of it for other programs. Give Medicaid more flexibility so governors can serve more people. Repeal the medical device tax. These are steps we could take. Make it easier for employees who want to help employees have a healthier lifestyle so they can have cheaper insurance. Allow people to buy insurance across state lines. Allow small businesses to pool their resources and offer insurance. I've listed a half dozen already. Steps we could agree on that would reduce health care costs in the country. That's where we should get. So I'm not in the shut down the government crowd, and neither are most anybody I know around here. We're in the take over the government crowd, and let's elect enough Republicans and Republican president to change the health care law. But in the meantime, we should make absolutely sure that men and women, whether on active duty or in the National Guard not on active duty at this time, we should make sure that they are paid on the day they're supposed to be paid and their spouses aren't waiting for the check. And I thank the senator from Texas for engaging in this quality, and I want to join him in this effort.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
Thank you. The idea that Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, over time will be seen in history as having been a good thing for the American people, I guess that's a bit in doubt. The President keeps saying there'll come a day when you will look back and claim to have voted for this. Maybe he's right. Maybe that day around the bend, down the road, over the hill is there. All I can say is that don't we know enough now about the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare, to slow down, take a time out, and see if we can make it better? Because the problems associated with the act are real. We don't need any more information. We don't need any more time. We just need to fix it in a bipartisan fashion. We passed it in a partisan fashion. Can we begin to look at the law anew in a bipartisan fashion? America would be better off. What do we know? We know a lot of people are working 29 hours when they had 40-hour work. If you don't believe me, ask the unions. I never thought I'd live to say this. Just listen to the unions on this thing. I don't say that a lot about their positions, but they're telling the president and anybody that will listen that the Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, is destroying the 40-hour work week. Why can't we do something about that? The medical device manufacturers, the people who do all the really neat things to make life better, particularly people who've been devastated in Iraq and Afghanistan, coming up with ways to make people's lives better who've had catastrophic injury. 34 of our Democratic friends have said this tax is not a good idea for that sector of the economy. So the jury is in on enough for us to slow down and start over and get this thing right. The good news for today is that we're not going to agree to blame each other. They're not going to accept blame. We're not going to accept blame about where we're at. But the one thing is, today, I think we've solved the problem, at least partially, for the military. Now, the people on the civilian side who are for military, I don't know if they're covered or not. But I want America to understand that the Congress did something appropriate just a few minutes ago, and that's to tell the men and women in the military, don't worry about this debacle up here in Washington when it comes to your paycheck. You're going to get paid. Now, I'll talk later on down the road about what kind of military we're handing to the next generation, what kind of funding we have for the military, and how smart sequestration is. But I just want to say to my colleagues, don't we know enough already about the Affordable Health Care Act to stop and work together before we plunge on, because it starts tomorrow? And I don't know why our Democratic friends are so insistent that we can't take a time out, start over, and see if we can find some bipartisan consensus. Until we do that, this problem only gets worse, and I would conclude with this thought. The Democratic Party came up with the Affordable Health Care Act. They passed it on a party line vote, but this thing is just not helping Democrats or hurting Republicans. It's hurting the economy as a whole. So the one thing I can tell you about big ideas, when one party pushes it through and nobody else on the other side signs up, you need to be wary about that product.
Senator from Texas.
I see my colleague from Texas on the floor who gave a very high-profile speech for about 21 hours the other night on the subject of Obamacare. I know he feels passionately about it, and his efforts have captured the imagination of the American people and reminded them of the various failures of this piece of legislation, some of which we've talked about perhaps fixing in the course of this ping-pong back of the continuing resolution. But I might ask him if he, through the chair, there have been so many failures, so many promises that have been made about Obamacare that are obviously not going to be kept. Things like, if you like what you have, you can keep it. I think that's one of the complaints, as the senator from South Carolina mentioned earlier, that organized labor, Mr. Trumpka, among others, went to the White House to get a special carve-out for. We were told, the president said, if the average family of four would see a reduction of $2,500 in the cost of their health care, and that hadn't proven to be true. So many promises that have not been kept, so many broken promises, so many reasons why we ought to be working together through the course of this to fix it. So I would ask my colleague through the chair, perhaps he can list a few more reasons why he believes that we need to be dealing with Obamacare. I know his preferred method was defunding Obamacare. I know he's not giving up on that. I'm a co-sponsor of his legislation that would accomplish that. But I would ask my colleague through the chair if he might comment on that.
Under previous order, the majority leader is to be recognized at 4 o'clock.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I was happy to ask consent to pass the bill that we just passed to ensure that the troops be paid. But I do disagree with the remarks of my Republican colleagues about much of what they said the last few minutes. We talk about what was in this amendment that they sent to us, this message they sent to us. Among other things, Mr. President, here's what it had in it. A provision, well, this is hard to comprehend, but listen to this. Would allow any employer, insurance plan, or individual to refuse to cover any of the women's health preventive services that were included by Senator Mikulski in our Women's Health Amendment, things like contraception, for virtually any reason during the one-year delay. That was in their amendment, and it was spoken of so clearly. I'll talk about it a little later, with a cancer survivor that's in the House of Representatives, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It would have an adverse effect on cancer survivors, on women. That's one thing they did. Now, there's been a lot of talk here about the medical device revenue issue. Mr. President, this is something that we'll take a look at. We need to do that. But remember, this magnanimous get rid of this by the Republicans in the House and in the Senate now would run up the debt by $30 billion. How do you like that? $30 billion. No offsets, no pay-go, just what does it matter? Because they are fixated on Obamacare. I mean fixated on it. And my friend from Texas referred to it as a bill. It's not a bill. It's the law. Has been for 4 years. My friend from Tennessee said he thinks how this should be resolved by having a Republican president. Mr. President, less than a year ago, the American people took a look at that. The number one issue in the campaign, Obamacare. That was the number one issue. And overwhelmingly, the American people said, we want it. We reject the Republicans' efforts to get rid of it. Now, Mr. President, Republicans always oppose big things. They opposed Social Security. They opposed Medicare. Mr. President, I've carried with me for 25 years. I have it in my wallet here. It's getting old and frayed. But here's what it says. I was there fighting the fight, one of 12 voting against Medicare because we knew it wouldn't work in 1965. Senator Dole. Now, we didn't get rid of it round one because we don't think it's politically smart. But we believe Medicare is going to wither on the vine. Newt Gingrich. Medicare has no place in a free world. Social Security is a rotten trick. I think we're going to have to bite the bullet on Social Security and phase that out over time. Former leader in this House, Dick Armey. So, Mr. President, they oppose Social Security, they oppose Medicare, but you know, now, Madam President, even though they opposed it, Social Security is popular. Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Medicare is popular. Why is it popular? Madam President, my first elected job was on a big hospital district in Nevada. And it was an indigent hospital in some frame of reference. But 40% of the people that were senior citizens that were admitted at a hospital had no health insurance. And we made sure that somebody vouched for their hospital bill. Father, mother, son, brother, neighbor. And if they didn't pay, we went after them. We had a big collection agent in the hospital. Madam President, the reason people like Medicare is because today, virtually 100% of seniors that come into a hospital have Medicare. That's why they like it. Obamacare. Tomorrow in Nevada, 600,000 people will have the opportunity to sign up on the exchanges. By the way, the exchanges were established by a Republican governor, Brian Sandoval. And, Madam President, people there can buy, some people can buy health insurance tomorrow for $100. People who have nothing. Just give this Obamacare a little time and it'll be looked back at as Social Security and Medicare. Right now, people love what they're able to get off this, and I'll go through some of that stuff. Let's renew where we are, Madam President. This weekend, Republicans in the House of Representatives did what we all feared they would do. They voted to shut down the government. Republicans knew their empty political stunt would fall in its face in the Senate, and it did. Yet, they voted to hold the government hostage until Democrats agreed to return to the days when insurance companies put profits before patient care. That's the way it was. Their vote was strikingly irresponsible and stunningly callous. Republicans don't seem to understand that stripping health insurance from millions of Americans would literally cost lives. Maybe none of those Republicans have gotten a doctor's bill that they couldn't pay. Maybe none of those Republicans spent a night awake worrying about whether a heart attack or a car accident would drive them into bankruptcy. Or what are you going to do with your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister who has no health insurance and they're sick? Millions of Americans have experienced the fears that I just described. For a glimpse of just how little regard Republicans have for struggling American families, look no further than the chief Senate rabble-rouser, Senator Ted Cruz. Listen to this, Madam President. He told David Gregory to meet the press how easy it is for the average American to get health insurance, even during these difficult times. Here's exactly what he said. Quote, if you want people to get health insurance, the best way for them to get health insurance is to get a job. That's what he said. I'm not making this up. His comment comes at a time when more than 11 million Americans are still struggling to find work, and when millions more who already have jobs still lack health insurance. That's why we passed Obamacare in the first place, to ensure access to quality, affordable health insurance for all Americans. To Republicans, Obamacare is a punchline to rile up their base. But for American families, Obamacare isn't a punchline, it's a lifeline. For millions of Americans, the Affordable Care Act is the only option to access quality health care at an affordable price. I've indicated 600,000 uninsured Nevadans who are eligible to purchase insurance through Nevada's HealthLink beginning tomorrow. Obamacare means access to affordable doctor visits, hospital stays, prescription drugs, and more. Uninsured Nevadans will have access to good insurance plans that cost as little as $100 a month. In fact, many Nevadans will get quality coverage for less than they pay for their monthly cell phone bill. Republicans would rip that lifeline away. Republicans want to return to the days when insurance companies could discriminate against women. Why? Because they're women. Madam President, I'm not making that up. That's the way it was. That's how it was before Obamacare. Republicans want to return to the days when insurance companies could deny care because of pre-existing conditions like diabetes, epilepsy, breast cancer. Madam President, even acne was a pre-existing condition. Again, I'm not making this up. That's the way it was before Obamacare. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she's a breast cancer survivor. And Sunday, I saw her say on the House floor, and I quote, make sure that every single day, that's what they're trying to do, she said, make sure every single day, each of us who survived cancer or another life-threatening illness stay living in fear for an insurance company to boot you off of your insurance. End of quote. Again, that's what it would do. I'm not making this up. That's the way it was before Obamacare. They want to return to the days when even children could be denied life-saving coverage because they were born with a heart murmur or some other disability. Again, Madam President, I'm making this up. That's the way it was before Obamacare. They want to return to the days when insurance companies could overcharge you when you were well and drop your policy when you're sick. That's the way it was. I'm not making it up. That was the way it was before Obamacare. Because of the Affordable Care Act, millions of seniors are saving money on prescription drugs. No one can dispute that. The donut hole is being filled. And it's all because of the Affordable Care Act. Millions of seniors are saving money on prescription drugs and many other things. Seniors today at no cost can go get a wellness check. They could never do that before. Millions of young people are staying on their parents' insurance. Madam President, do you know how important that is? I will tell you how important it is. The little town of Searchlight, where I'm from, a woman who was assistant postmistress, she retired, her husband retired. They have a son, Jeff, and he's going to school. He was going to school at a community college. He had to go off his parents' insurance when he turned 23. Madam President, within a few weeks of his turning 23, he was sick. He didn't know what was wrong. But he went to the doctor. He had testicular cancer. Now, he had to interrupt his education. He had 3 surgeries. His parents struggled to pay for that. They're not people of means. One doctor friend of mine gave one of the surgeries for nothing. But, Madam President, other people didn't have that benefit of my being able to help them, or parents like his who struggled to take care of their son. That's why anymore that won't happen. And again, the Jeff Hill story I'm not making up. That's the way it was before Obamacare. Because of the Affordable Care Act, millions of seniors are saving money. That's the way it is. I've said that. Millions of young people are staying on their parents' insurance. Hundreds of thousands of businesses that already offer their employees health insurance are getting tax credits for doing the right thing. But Republicans want to turn back the clock on all these benefits and more. They want to force more than 25 million families to once again rely on crowded, expensive emergency rooms or go without life-saving care they need. And many of them go without that care. That's how it was before Obamacare. Unless Democrats agree to all of their demands, unless we agree to strip tens of millions of Americans off their health insurance and force tens of millions more to live in fear, they'll shut down the government. That's where we're headed, Madam President. Why do you think the Republicans came over here thinking by some reason that we wouldn't agree to fund the troops? They know that Boehner's going to shut down the government. The House of Representatives could have voted yesterday. They could vote today to keep the government running. But they're going to vote, I'm sure, to shut it down. Many House Republicans have admitted that Speaker Boehner has the votes to pass a clean bill to keep the government open and functioning. Here's what Republican Paul Labrador from Idaho said. He said this on Meet the Press. I'm not willing to vote for a clean continuing resolution, but I think there's enough votes in the Republican Party who are willing to do that. I think that's what you're going to see. End of quote. Republican Congressman Charlie Dent from Pennsylvania. Here's what he said. Quote, I'm prepared to vote for a clean resolution tomorrow. That's today. He said that yesterday. It's time to govern. I don't intend to support a fool's errand, and it is, Madam President, a fool's errand. That's what he called it, and that's what it is. These reasonable Republicans are correct. The House easily could and clearly should pass a clean continuing resolution today. All Speaker Boehner has to do is let every member of the House of Representatives, Democrats and Republicans, all 435 of them vote on a clean CR, and it would pass big time. The Speaker has another opportunity to do the right thing. This afternoon, the Senate voted to strip the hollow political ransom notes from the House. We rejected the House amendments. The House has what we passed. They've had it since last Friday. House Republicans will face the same choice tonight, or this afternoon, or this evening, whenever they choose, that they did this weekend, pass the Senate's clean bill to keep the government functioning or force a government shutdown. Democrats have already met Republicans in the middle. and agreed to their lower funding level, even though Republicans have refused to negotiate a responsible budget for more than 6 months. Now let's talk about what a lot of my Republican friends have talked about, Madam President, this afternoon. They need more time to negotiate. Democrats, Madam President, have already met Republicans in the middle. Senator Murray, the chairperson of our Budget Committee, because the Republicans said they wanted it and it was the right thing to do, we acknowledge that, we passed a budget 6 months ago. And where are the Republicans in this 6 months, a half a year? Why couldn't we go to conference? Because they wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us. Now, what has happened and why they can't take yes for an answer is hard for me to comprehend. Our, excuse me, our number was a lot higher than theirs. We took their lower number. Senator Murray doesn't like that. Senator McCulsey doesn't like it. We took their lower number, 988. Why can't they take yes for an answer? But in addition to that, all these people who whine that we haven't done any negotiating, how many times has the President taken Republican senators to dinner? At the White House, this restaurant, that restaurant? And what did he do? He put in writing what he was willing to do. And many of us were concerned that he had given far too much. We didn't like it, but that's what the President did because he wants a deal. He wants something big to help the government. So all these meals that he paid for, have we gotten anything from the Republicans? Not a single sentence. Not a single sentence. They refused to put anything in writing. So let's not talk about not negotiating. We have negotiated, and negotiated. The last 2 weeks we've had enough, and we're not going to negotiate. That's where we are. Now, for shrill Republicans in the House to demand more time to negotiate is simply ludicrous. I looked up today what ludicrous means. Here's what it means. Comically ridiculous, and that is a good definition. When I put in this ludicrous, I wasn't sure what it meant. I want to make sure that I got the right word. I got it. Comically ridiculous. The President met with Republicans in the White House over dinner, other places. He's given them a list of difficult cuts he's willing to make to reduce the deficit, but Republicans haven't reciprocated. They've never once put down in writing what they're willing to concede. Not once. So Democrats are through negotiating with ourselves. That's what it amounts to. The fate of our country and our economy now rests with John Boehner. Tonight we'll see whether the Speaker is really willing to shut down the government, risking our economic recovery, to extract callous political concessions. I hope he makes a responsible decision. I doubt that he will, but I hope he does, and help avert a government shutdown.